There was a time when occult knowledge was hidden, locked behind symbols, rituals, and silence, not because it was forbidden, but because it was too powerful to be left unearned. Today, that secrecy is gone, but with it, something else has vanished: meaning. The esoteric is now visible everywhere, not because humanity has grown wiser, but because we've confused exposure with understanding. What once demanded years of inner work, ethical refinement, and disciplined study is now made consumable. It's accessible, but hollow. To understand how we arrived here, we need to go back to the late 19th century, a time when science had become the new religion of the West. The Industrial Revolution had changed not only economies, but imaginations. Mechanistic thinking dominated the worldview. The universe was seen as a machine, the human being as a biological processor, and consciousness as a chemical illusion. It was precisely in this vacuum of meaning that Theosophy appeared, not as a nostalgic return to mysticism, but as a radical reintegration of spirituality, science, and philosophy. Helena Blavatsky, co-founder of the Theosophical Society, did not offer a soft return to mysticism. She diagnosed a sickness in the Western psyche, the forgetting of soul. For Blavatsky, the occult was not entertainment, it was memory, a restoration of ancient wisdom buried under modern noise. Her writings were not mystical for their own sake, they were blueprints, thick with metaphor and myth, designed to reawaken metaphysical memory. The Theosophical Society, founded in 1875, wasn't built on vague mystical aspirations. It had a clear and daring mission. First, it aimed to establish a sense of universal brotherhood, a radical idea in a world still fractured by race, class, and religion. All souls, it asserted, were expressions of the same unfolding intelligence. Second, it sought to compare the world's religious, philosophical, and scientific systems, not to flatten their differences, but to reveal their hidden harmonies. And third, it committed to the disciplined investigation of both the hidden laws of nature and the latent powers of human consciousness, not through superstition, but through disciplined inquiry. This was not spirituality as escape, it was spirituality as structure, a systematic, even architectural attempt to reunite soul and science, myth and reason, East and West. Blavatsky's work, particularly The Secret Doctrine and Isis Unveiled, proposed a universe not of randomness, but of intelligent design. She spoke of root races, cyclical time, the illusion of material reality, and the spiritual evolution of human consciousness. She reintroduced concepts like karma, maya, and reincarnation to Western discourse, but not simply by importing Indian metaphysics. Rather, she revealed that Western esotericism itself, Hermeticism, Neoplatonism, Kabbalah, had carried these same truths all along, albeit in veiled forms. The goal wasn't to create a new religion, but to offer a meta-framework, a structure in which all sacred traditions could be understood as parts of a greater whole. Following Blavatsky, Annie Besant took Theosophy further into social engagement, linking esoteric knowledge with political reform, education, and women's rights. Rudolf Steiner took the principles further, designing systems of education and agriculture rooted in spiritual law. And Alice Bailey pushed the teachings into a more psychological and planetary direction, emphasizing humanity's group evolution and the hidden hierarchy of spiritual intelligences. Together, they weren't reviving superstition. They were responding to a crisis of meaning. They recognized that modernity had produced incredible external progress, but at the cost of inner coherence. Theosophy was their attempt to restore that lost axis, a bridge between science and soul, intellect and intuition, matter and mystery. But like all powerful systems, Theosophy carried a risk. It demanded time, humility, and practice. In a culture becoming addicted to speed and surface, this slow depth became the first casualty. And this, as we will see, is where the deeper trouble began. The distortion began the moment access outpaced preparation. What had once required years of initiation, study, and inner restructuring could now be encountered through a casual scroll. That hidden laws governed both the cosmos and the psyche, laws which could be studied, lived, and eventually embodied. The sacred began to drift, not because it was attacked, but because it was flattened. But time has a way of softening the edges of things. Today, occult knowledge is no longer hidden, it's everywhere. Sliced into online posts, simplified for trend cycles, absorbed into wellness aesthetics. The same symbols that once required years of study are now printed on sweatshirts. Tarot cards come with QR codes. Ancient mantras are played as ambient noise in cafes. This isn't evolution, it's dilution. When everything is visible, nothing is sacred. The danger is not that more people are exploring spiritual ideas. The danger is that the depth is being lost, that sacred systems are being turned into aesthetic accessories, stripped of discipline, stripped of rigor, stripped of responsibility. The old initiatory systems weren't exclusive out of elitism, they were protective by necessity. Real knowledge isn't just informative, it's transformative and sometimes destabilizing. You cannot encounter it without also encountering yourself. Because real occult knowledge is not neutral. It shapes the one who carries it. It challenges assumptions, collapses identities, and exposes illusions, and unless it is approached with humility and preparation, it can distort more than it reveals. This is why, in esoteric traditions, the symbol was never meant to be explained in plain language. It was designed to provoke an internal movement, not deliver an external definition. A symbol isn't a code, it's a mirror, and mirrors are only useful when you're willing to look without flinching. In the same way, ritual was never mere repetition. It was a form of ontological tuning, a realignment of the self with invisible architecture. In the modern world, we imitate the form but lose the function. We perform without presence. We repeat without reverence. There is a wide gap between learning about light and becoming a vessel for it. Because to know is easy, to become is costly. The danger here is subtle, but profound. When sacred knowledge is stripped of its inner disciplines, it becomes a spectacle, and eventually a parody. This is what we see now: spiritual aesthetics without spiritual transformation. Esoteric terms casually dropped into branding, rituals performed for engagement metrics, manifestation reduced to consumer psychology. But real occult knowledge has never been about what you can attract. It's about what you're willing to let go of. It doesn't decorate the ego, it dismantles it. The real question is never, how much do you know? But always, how much of what you know have you become? And this is what modern seekers are rarely warned about, that true esoteric knowledge exerts a pressure. Once it enters your psyche, it begins to demand coherence. It pulls your life into alignment, sometimes through upheaval, sometimes through silence, but always it insists on integration. And this is where most people turn back, not because the path is hidden, but because it cannot be skimmed. It does not offer content, it asks for contact. True knowledge is not weightless. It presses on the soul, it shapes, strains, and sometimes even breaks the structures that are no longer compatible with it. This is why in all genuine esoteric traditions, knowledge was never treated as a possession, but as a burden one had to be prepared to carry. Today, we have confused knowing with becoming. We think insight is transformation, but the path has always demanded something harder: embodiment. You cannot read your way into truth. You cannot intellectualize your way into gnosis. You must live it, and that living is often uncomfortable, slow, and unspectacular. This is what initiatory systems always understood. They didn't just ask the initiate to understand, they required the initiate to change their rhythm of life, the way they ate, spoke, walked, thought. Because without embodiment, knowledge fractures. It becomes what the ancient Greeks called doxa, mere opinion. It doesn't root, it floats. Every spiritual law you learn will eventually ask you, have you made space for me in your habits, in your ethics, in your relationships? If not, the knowledge remains abstract, and worse, corrosive. Because occult truths are not benign, they activate something. When left ungrounded, they can feed inflation, fantasy, even despair. This is why the ancients paired wisdom with discipline, insight with service, vision with humility. And this is what modern spiritual culture often forgets. That knowledge is not an aesthetic but a structure, one that must be built into the nervous system, into the daily rhythm of breath, thought, and choice. Real transformation begins where comfort ends. It begins when the teachings stop inspiring and start demanding, not outward performance but inward coherence. Because in the end, the occult does not reward curiosity, it rewards consistency. It asks not what you've read, but what you've integrated. Not what you say, but what you are becoming. To know the map is easy. To take one real step on the path, that is the work. Thank you for watching.